Relief for the loved ones of Cecile Kohler and Jacques after the release of those two French nationals, teachers who'd been arrested while on a trip to Iran 3 years ago. They've spent their first night inside of the French embassy. Meanwhile, Iran says one of its nationals, accused of stoking terrorism online, is now inside of its embassy in Paris. Madieh Esfandiari recently granted conditional release. There were those who are wondering if there is perhaps a quid pro quo. She's due to appear in court in January along with 4 others.
The 2 citizens who had been convicted as spies were released last night by the judiciary based on Islamic clemency.
Will our citizen be released in France?
Our citizen, Ms. Esfandiari, is now free. She is currently at our embassy, and once her court proceedings are completed, she will return.
More on the release of Cecile Kohler and Jacques now.
French citizens Cecile Kohler and Jacques, who've been detained in Iran on espionage charges since 2022, have been released on bail.
They've arrived safe and sound at the French embassy. They're under our protection. We will continue the work we started months ago to secure their definitive release.
The pair were arrested in May 2022 at Tehran airport after traveling to Iran on tourist visas. They were accused of spying for a foreign power and sent to the infamous high-security Evin prison, where they were held separately for over 1,200 days without trial. During that time, rights groups and family members repeatedly denounced the couple's arbitrary arrest and detention conditions that amounted to torture.
They're sleeping on the floor, in cells with harsh artificial lighting 24 hours a day. Still not allowed an independent lawyer, still have very little contact with their embassy, and the contact they have with us is very sporadic and heavily supervised.
Last month, Kohler and Paris were both sentenced to lengthy prison sentences by an Iranian court. And while the circumstances surrounding their release remain unclear, it could be the result of diplomatic maneuvers by Paris. Tehran says the pair were only let go on bail and remain under surveillance, while French authorities have vowed to secure their full release from Iran as soon as possible.
For more, let's go to Washington. Tara Kangarlou is adjunct professor at Georgetown University and the author of The Heartbeat of Iran. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you, François.
What's your reaction to this story? This French couple, they were arrested more than 3 years ago, suddenly released, but they're not out of the country yet. They're still at the French embassy. And now this new twist with Iran claiming that one of their nationals is inside its own embassy in Paris.
Yes, of course, but my reaction, unfortunately, is not a reaction of surprise, because we've seen this happen over and over the past couple of years. The Iranian government is known to take foreign nationals, dual citizens, as bargaining chips. So we've seen that with Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe's case, who essentially was held for years and then released over a presumed debt between Iran and the UK. We saw also Olivier van der Castille, a high-profile case. He was a humanitarian aid worker from Belgium who was released also in 2022, and then he was released in a prison exchange case with a former Iranian diplomat, Asadullahi, who, by the way, plotted an alleged terrorist attack in France. So, and these cases continue. And of course, Jason Rezaian, Washington Post correspondent in Tehran, who was released prior to the JCPOA and just months after the JCPOA, along with other dual nationals and foreign citizens, was released. So that to just encapsulate that this is unfortunately a trend by the Iranian regime to detain dual nationals and foreign citizens, to exchange with what they presumably want from foreign states, and in this case, France. Now, the case of Mahdia Esfandiari is very interesting because I bet you if you speak with an average Iranian in Iran or even abroad, they don't know who she is. And the reason she was arrested was not so much what she was doing for the Iranian regime or, plotting any sort of terrorist act for the Iranian government, but rather she was very active on Telegram and social media in supportive of Hamas and also anti-Israel activities and sentiments. So that to me is very interesting. Now, these folks seem to be in either country's embassies, but that also is a practice that we've seen before. Iran will soon allow them to fly out, and I'm sure the families are beyond excited to receive the two French nationals in France.
Or will they be allowed to fly out? Mahdia Esfandiari, who is due to appear in court, she's not allowed to leave the country, and that's in next January. Is there a possibility that Cecile Kohler and Jacques Paris could then have to return to jail?
I think that would be an embarrassment, and again, based on the trend and what we've seen, again, unfortunately, by the Iranian regime, I expect them to be released, because that would be an utter embarrassment for the Iranian regime. Not that they really care, but again, Mahdia Esfandiari was deemed as a flight risk. So I think that's also worth noting. But of course, these are done on a government level, so I don't think she'll be on a commercial flight. But also, one thing that stood out, François, is the fact that the French judiciary is independent in its functioning, but the government is also involved right now. President Macron made the announcement. I think that signals that this exchange is imminent. But also, again, the question is, what is it that Iran wants? Because there's always an ask. And right now we're at a precarious stage where Iran is fully isolated after the snapback mechanism. All sanctions, all UN sanctions are back. And France and President Macron, along with, of course, Germany and UK, were pushing for that just 2 months ago. And so is this a way for Iranian regime to start some form of exchange and conversations with the French? Or is it because they are presumably having back channel talks with the United States for some form of potential negotiations in Oman and Qatar? Again, these are all unofficial, but I don't think, again, based on what we've seen over the years, none of this happened in isolation. And there's always a backstory to these very unfortunate human exchange prison swaps that we've seen.
Yeah, and on top of the fact that there's this conditional release of that French couple, we had recently this 18-year-old Franco-German tourist who was released and sent home. Does that add fuel to speculation that you've just mentioned there, that perhaps this is Iran saying we're ready to talk?
It's interesting because Iran's foreign minister just 2 days ago spoke with Al Jazeera English, and he said, we are in no rush. But reading the Iranian news and watching what the supreme leader said just 2 days ago, by the way, ahead of the anniversary of the U.S. embassy takeover back in 1979, as I'm sure you remember, which was November 4th, the supreme leader said, we are in no rush for immediate negotiations. But he didn't fully shut it down. Now, Iranians, again, have proven over the years to have this exuberant hubris, to project this power and independence when it comes to negotiation with the West. But quite frankly, if you look at the situation in Iran domestically, people are suffering tremendously from economic pressure. The country is fully isolated, and they've returned back to pretty much the Ahmadinejad era, where the ordinary society was suffering profoundly. And another thing I want to mention is what's extremely important is the last few days, by the way, there has been massive crackdown against domestic activists and academics and economists. These are independent scholars and thinkers and intellectuals who've been arrested in Iran. We don't hear much about that in the international news sphere, but these are important moves that once again show that while Iran may project their comfort with not negotiating with the West, but things are not going well domestically. They're afraid. They know that the society is extremely unhappy, and they're afraid of that. So, do they need to negotiate with the West for their own longevity? Perhaps, but they're never going to admit to that, unfortunately.
And one last question for you, Tara Kangarlou. What does Washington want? Because Donald Trump had been talking up negotiations just before the U.S. participated in Israel's bombing of nuclear installations.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Washington believes that they have destroyed the entirety of Iran's nuclear facility and arsenal and so on and so forth. So they took that as a win, right? But then again, when you read the Iranian news fears and hear the officials, they're very arrogantly would say that we are going to resume our work. So the narratives are quite different, and I believe they're for their own domestic consumption. But I can't help but to think about Donald Trump's very long speech at the Knesset in Israel just 3 weeks ago, where he very much focused on Iran and negotiation and engagement with Iran being next. And I think the president of the United States is on this path of making these deals quick and fast and winning at home and really adding to his legacy of, as he wants to call, peacemaking in the Middle East. So I do believe there's great interest. The Iranians, again, would never admit to that, but Iran is not coming to any of this from a position of power, but complete isolation.
Tara Kangarlou, so many thanks for joining us from Washington.